most excited for people to see this season?
Shelob, spiders, action, mud. What's not to like about that? I'm still like in the shower trying to get mud out of my every single orifice.
How many seasons of Rings of Power do we want to show or to Amazon?
Oh, well, we've agreed to do a 50-hour mega epic. We're working on season 3 now, and that's all we can say.
I have been thinking to myself a lot lately. I've been keeping myself up with all these thoughts running like a mad dog through my head. And the only way I've been able to sleep is by throwing on the extended edition of The Lord of the Rings. Then, with my mind filled with wroth nostalgia and the ambience of busy hobbits, I can fall right to sleep. What has been filling the darkest parts of my mind lately is that the film industry is not what it used to be. And even though there's some bangers out there that shine through every once in a while, there are now more and more projects that are similar to the Rings of Power that get made fun of for humanizing the orcs in the cringiest way. To be honest, I really am scared about the future of the film industry. My main concern is that every distribution company now feels like they need some sort of streaming platform to monetize. And it's always the companies like Amazon and Disney Plus and Netflix that seem to pump these out like there's no tomorrow, and they're usually pretty bad. The Rings of Power series is just another stinker added to the pile. And in this video, we're going to cover all the major lore flaws in the Rings of Power Season 2, Episode 3. So at the end of the first season, we saw Isildur trapped in a burning building after Adar forced fire to cascade down Mount Doom and turn the Southlands into Mordor. With the building falling on top of him, Elendil assumes that Isildur is dead and now sails back to Numenor without him. We now find out that he didn't die, obviously, and he has been taken by little baby Shelob to be suckled and eaten. This episode never explicitly said that the spider trying to eat Isildur was Shelob, but Maxim Baldry, the person who plays Isildur, has said it multiple times.
You know, Isildur wakes up in a spider cave and has to fight Shelob in the first sequence.
There really isn't that much about the history of Shelob, but we do know that Shelob was born in Middle-earth sometime during the Elder Days, which is pretty ambiguous, but during the Second and Third Ages, it was referred to the times that came before the downfall of Angband at the end of the First Age. While dwelling in the Mountains of Terror, either Shelob or her kin also fought Beren when he passed through to enter Doriath, and Beren was a man of the House of Beor in the First Age. This would mean that Shelob is way older during 1500 of the Second Age than the Rings of Power depicts. I mean, it's also kind of a boring scene anyway, he just escapes in like 5 seconds. Shelob fled from Ruin, and sometime during the Dark Years, she came to Mordor, though how she came to dwell there is unknown. However, she had already established her lair high in the Ephil Duath, long before Sauron claimed Mordor as his own and started to build Barad-dûr around 1000 of the Second Age. There's also no mention anywhere in Tolkien's lore of Shelob ever coming in contact with Isildur during this time. In fact, Isildur is not even supposed to have been born yet. Isildur was born in 3209 of the Second Age, and in 3434, the combined armies of elves and men crossed the Misty Mountains and marched onto the Dagorlad. There, the forces of Sauron were defeated and he retreated into Barad-dûr to withstand a siege that lasted 7 years. I really think they did Shelob dirty on this one, but let me know what you think in the comments. I also wanted to address the eagles in the room here. They show one of the eagles descending down into the Numenor throne room, and they essentially put the eagle in there to demonstrate a powerful symbol for a good omen. Then the eagle just leaves. Was that the best way to use the eagle though? Or did they violate the credibility of all the eagles? Now, I am actually very torn on this one because in the Second Age, a pair of eagles had an eyrie in the king's house in Armenelos, the capital of Numenor, until the reign of Tar and Calaman, who reigned between 2221 to 2386 of the Second Age. This is when the kings of Numenor became hostile to the Valar. The Numenorians believed that 3 eagles, whom they referred to as the Witnesses of Manwë, were sent by Manwë to guard the summit of Meneltarma, which is the sacred mountain in the center of Numenor. The 3 eagles would appear flying around the mountain when the Numenorians would begin their religious ceremonies, which is called the 3 Prayers, in which they would worship Eru, who is the top boss, the creator of Valar and the supreme being of the universe. Many eagles lived upon the hills around the mountain Soronto. Eagle-shaped storm clouds called the Eagles of the Lord of the West were sent by Manwë when he tried to reason with or threaten the Numenorians. From this, we can deduce that the eagles did play a central role in the Numenorians' lives at this time, so it does make sense that they would appear in the show. But did they portray that eagle in the way that they were intended to be used? I could make a whole other video just on the eagles and the conspiracies behind them, but I'm just going to focus on how Tolkien wanted them to be used. A while back, there was a question going around, asking why the eagles didn't fly the ring to Mount Doom. During this time of speculation, J.R.R. Tolkien wrote in one of his letters describing exactly what the eagles are meant to be used for. In letter 210, he wrote, "The eagles are a dangerous machine. I have used them sparingly, and that is the absolute limit of their credibility or usefulness." Tolkien has always used the eagles very carefully as a plot device, showing that he is very self-aware when he uses them. He describes them as a dangerous machine, which tells me that he only ever uses the eagles when it's absolutely necessary for the plot to drive forward. He also says that is the limit of their credibility or usefulness. So he's basically just putting his foot down and saying, not only is this how they should be used, this is the only way they can be used. So did the Rings of Power episode 3 use the eagle in the right way? I actually think they did for the most part, because the eagle was seen only once throughout the entire episode for a very specific purpose that did in fact drive the plot forward. I mean, he didn't say that it necessarily had to be a good plot. My final thoughts would be on the infamous baby orc scene, where the baby orc is being cradled by the female orc and this male orc comes to comfort them. Many people are mad about this scene mainly because it shows a baby orc, and many people only think of the orcs as being created by farming them and coming out of the ground in all these slimy balls and stuff, like the Lord of the Rings trilogy does. Now, there are many things about this scene that are absolutely revolting to look at, but that's not one of the things that you should be upset about. The true origin of the orcs as a race of sentient creatures was a matter of heavy debate among the lore masters. However, all agreed that they would not have come to be without the corrupting influence of Morgoth. Tolkien tended to alter his perspective of the breeding of orcs over the years, never coming to a solid answer before his death. However, the Silmarillion does have a very good explanation of the orcs, where it says, "And thus did Melkor breed the hideous race of the orcs, in envy and mockery of the elves, of whom they were afterwards the bitterest foes. For the orcs had life, and multiplied after the manner of the children of Iluvatar. And not that had life of its own, nor the semblance of life could ever Melkor make, since his rebellion in the Ainulindal, before the beginning." There's a lot of gray area surrounding this passage since Tolkien died before the Silmarillion was published, but if the orcs were made in the mockery of elves, that would also mean that there would be female orcs just as there are female elves. The passage also says that they multiplied after the manner of the children of Iluvatar, referring to the race of elves and men. This would mean that there may be baby orcs running about through Middle-earth. So now that we got the lore of the orcs out of the way, let's talk a bit more about how this scene really sucks. It simply sucks because they're trying to humanize the orcs by having them act like there's in the Notebook or something and trying to start their own love story. Let me just tell you a bit about their culture. Orcs were pitiless and took pleasure in all kinds of cruel and wicked acts. They did evil deeds for their own amusement, purely for the sport of it. Their fractious and vicious natures made them unreliable servants. When outside their master's reach, orcs would often disobey their commands and fight amongst themselves to the detriment of their master's designs. In battle, orcs fought with reckless ferocity and delighted in the slaughter and torture of their foes. However, many had a cowardly nature and were often regarded as inferior to the soldiers of men, elves, and dwarves, though far more expendable. Orcs also proved themselves adept at taming and riding wolves and wargs, an ability harnessed by the Dark Lords of their armies. The corruption inherent to orc being made them virtually powerless to resist the domination of a greater will. At first this was Morgoth's, and later became Sauron's. While under such domination, orcs were reduced to an ant-like life. This was most plainly seen under Sauron's tyranny, as he operated on a smaller scale than did Morgoth, and his foes were far weaker than the Noldor of the Elder Days. The Orcish people thus cycled between periods of unity when they had a Dark Lord to unite them, and disunity when there was no Dark Lord. That doesn't at all sound to me like orcs are willing or even capable of emotions beyond hate and anger. So seeing them act in a caring and loving way towards their own kind is pretty unrealistic, and honestly just super cringe. This episode was surprisingly more in tune with some of the lore than other episodes were, but even when the lore matches, the plot is either very mediocre or the scenes are just so hard to look at because they're so cringe. I've sought my thoughts, and if you want to see my thoughts on the lore mistakes in episode 1 of season 2, then you should click right up here, and I'll see you there.